this is a new trend, and it's in the opposite direction that we should want it to go in if we want nutritional security here, like 3 to 4, like 3.6, I think, trillion in like global agricultural production value. I would say there's an equal amount of operational dysfunction at most farm operations as there is in startups. Like, how do you lower the barrier and like open the door and say, hey, technologists, innovators, smart young people, like, we want you to work on these problems, and there's opportunities to build profitable, impactful businesses.
Welcome, everybody, to Learn with Lowell. Today, we're joined with Connie Bowen, co-founder of Farmhand Ventures, agricultural investor, maker of the Ag Tech Toolkit, Yield Lab Institute board member, rugby player, and a dozen other accolades. We discussed the many challenges and opportunities in this $2 to $3 trillion market that is agriculture. If you're hungry to start a new profession, apply your skills in a new arena, or learn what it takes to put food on the table, and this is the episode for you. Let's stay curious and learn about Connie, agriculture, and the future of food on this episode of Learn with Lowell. I think one of the big things about America that most people don't know about is the fact that America was kind of the breadbasket of the world for the last couple hundred years. It's one of those things that we export to other regions for political benefit, but also economic benefit. And so I'm curious with like climate change and all these things going on, like how you would rate like America's health for the future in terms of just our economic agriculture regions.
Okay, in terms of economic agricultural regions. So there's so many different dynamics at play here. So yeah. I think first you kind of have to break ag up. Like you've got the Midwest, which you just talked about, like the breadbasket, right? But really you've mostly got corn and beans too, and quite a bit of livestock. And that corn, and a lot of that is going to feed, fuel. That's kind of where it's going, less to food. Then you've got the food side. Most of that currently is in California. That's like 80+% of U.S. specialty crop, so fruit, veg, nut production. I would say that currently we continue to be a big exporter. There are a lot of products actually that we continue to deliver premium products in, and other countries, I would say, are catching up for sure. Plus, there are certain pressures here that are causing problems. I think the number one is labor. Most growers I talk to would agree with that.
At any point in this conversation, if you find value in it, please subscribe. It is hugely beneficial, and it tells Google and everyone out there that this is content worth watching. Thank you for everyone thus far who has commented, liked, subscribed, and told their friends.
Especially on the specialty crop side. It's a bit of a different issue in the Midwest, where we've invested so much in high-tech combines that are basically autonomous at this point. And you should do a lot more with one guy. But we, for the past 2 years, have actually been increasing U.S. imports of specialty crops for like the first time. I think maybe once we did it in the 60s, but don't quote me for sure on that. Fact check me. But like this is a new trend, and it's in the opposite direction that we should want it to go in if we want nutritional security here.
Yeah, I 100% agree with what you're saying. I like the fact that you cut off the rest of the world. America's fine. We can feed people. Like, it's nice that we can export that type of stuff. I think one thing, which is, I think it's really weird for people that I read about, is, and I think you alluded to this a minute ago, America will export quality products. Like, we make really, really high quality stuff in America, and then we'll export that high quality stuff to other people, and then we'll import third tier stuff in, like tobacco, for instance. I think like we grow like the best tobacco in the world, but then the companies will then send it to like some other country, then they import third string tobacco and then make the cigarettes that most people eat. So like not eat, smoke. And so that's one of those things that I think I would like to just agree with you. I think making it so that we have like that moat of exporting things and making us like resolute for whatever comes forward, I think that's a really great thing. So like labor is really the big thing that's making that shift, or what's making that shift where we're being more of an importer? Because there's more than enough land. Like, we have tons of land.
Yeah, we have tons of land. I wish that feels like a little slight at the like controlled environment ag vertical farm folks who are really feeling a reality check and like market corrections right now. So I guess one, ag has to be huge, right? Like it has to be a huge industry because like we all eat. So like you've got nearly like 3 to 4, like 3.6, I think, trillion in like global agricultural production value. And you don't want it to all be in one region because natural disasters happen and they are happening at increasing rates, and all evidence would point towards that rate to continue to accelerate. So you really want to have what I call regional crop economies, essentially, where, and let's look at like citrus for an example of this. Like Brazil is a huge exporter of citrus, as is Florida. Florida has been super hard hit with citrus greening, which has been around for a minute now. And so their crops have gone down. They're still producing quite a bit. That has led to California increasing a bit. But I think for people as consumers who want to be able to have orange juice year round, so we don't get scurvy, we want to have optionality to import, export from different places. But yeah, like at the end of the day, it is very good to be able to produce all of your necessary nutrition within your own boundaries if you have to. So I guess we're in a strong position.
Yeah, I was talking to a friend of mine in the middle, who's a big fan of the Middle East, and I always tell him I'm a big fan of the Midwest, and that's why we get along because we all have middle and something we appreciate. And they're really going ham on these vertical farms and all these other things. And we were having this fun debate about like why should America care about vertical farming if we have so much space, etc. Because we have a little bit more, and it's been a really long time too. I think this is like something that like Americans don't appreciate because it's been a really long time since we had a famine in America. Like I think China views agriculture much more seriously than America does because we haven't had a famine in a while. I feel like we've kind of gotten ignorant to the fact like agriculture is a huge part of our economy, and it's something that we do as like a soft power thing for the rest of the world. And feeding people, like if you're like feeding your neighbor, that neighbor's gonna be real nice to you. Like if you're like, even if the neighbor's paying for it, he's like, well, I'm not gonna like walk my dog on his property and like take a poop or something. Like they're gonna be a little nicer. So there's all these benefits, but there's like unique challenges I think to America, given the fact that we have the land. But then it's like, how do you innovate when there are? I think when I was in high school, they were saying that from 2010 to 2020, about 50% of mom and pop farmers were going to retire. Now we're in the 2020s, so I imagine that trend's even worse.
Yeah.
And I always wonder, like, how are people supposed to innovate in a sector that seems quite saturated with like these big, large organizations?
Yeah. Okay. Couple things. And I also totally didn't answer your other point on labor. So like labor is a factor in the decrease in labor intensive crops, which tend to be the stuff we eat. As is drought. I would say that is a major concern from a California standpoint, because like we just had like a freakish rain season. Like we're gonna kind of not think too hard about it for a year and then it'll be a problem again, probably. Give or take. That's one of the key, and that's one of the difference between the Midwest and the Middle East. Like that's one of the arguments too for a circular kind of vertical farm containerized grow system. It can be more resource efficient and you can recirculate stuff. And like personally, I actually got into ag tech, like building like aeroponic food computer systems. So like just small, fully containerized, environments that you can control all the parameters from the cloud. And so I think there is a role in specific contexts, and that might be a crop, it's a blend of variables that sets the context. And I think it is probable that in the US we continue to produce a vast majority of our certainly calories, but I'm going to say nutrients too, outdoors. I think there's vertical farms like controlled environment, and then there's also like greenhouses, high-tech greenhouses, like Dutch-style greenhouses, all the way down to like polytunnels. Those will increase, especially in the context of climate volatility. You want some degree of controlled environment because like in a world where you have no control over your environment, the more you can obtain, the better. But yeah, that's like a key difference, I guess. But the one other thing I was going to throw out is like, while we haven't had any famines here, we do have a major nutritional problem. And like, it's interesting. Like, I live in St. Louis, and like, I can go to certain parts of town in 2023, and there's not fresh produce available at the store that is near for that neighborhood. And so, like, I didn't realize this when I was younger, how stark I think the kind of contrast between, like, I grew up with like a health nut kind of suburban mom. And like, we have a major nutritional access problem here. And that gets, we could get way in the weeds of like why exactly that is, but it won't be solved by farmers alone. But I think that one thing we need to do to alleviate it is increase access and affordability of fresh produce as opposed to highly processed foods. So yeah.
You see those types of foodstuffs like getting to that price point being like milk, where in like I think from like the 20s to the 70s we started subsidizing milk a lot so people could afford it, so that like kids wouldn't have bowed limbs and like we could have soldiers. It was like, it actually was a defensive thing, like a defense thing, because like people kept showing up and being 4F because they didn't have like the physical attributes we needed to like for them to fight. Do you see, for us to meet that requirement, some level of subsidy or regulation going in there to allow local growers to produce what we need, so we don't have like that nutrient desert, or for lack of a better word?
In theory, that would be an interesting solution. In theory, that could be part of the solution.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, we're in a farm bill, theoretically a farm bill year. My money is on it actually next year being a farm bill year. And the farm bill is like 80% plus of the budget for it goes towards actually like food benefits. Like SNAP is one of the largest budget items in it. And then the other component goes really primarily to like row crop commodities. And then there's not a heck of a lot going on there for specialty crops. So you could start to fix that. I think that the thing that is true though, and you were talking a little bit about like farm ownership consolidation, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
What's really there's a great book on this that I like highly recommend to everyone. It's or related to this, called Farms and Other F Words by Sarah Mock. But like,
great name.
Isn't it a great name? But there's like farms are businesses, right? Like every farm is a business. So ultimately it's about making money. And what is different about farms than other businesses is like the government can't afford to let too many of them go out of business, or too much acreage go out of production, right? And so, but we do this weird thing where like in this country, well, in a lot of places where we kind of just like trust farmers and we think of farmers as this like special class of good citizen, which is like, there are a lot of great farmers, so that's cool. And also there are like some bad farmers. And under every farm operation, you've got a hierarchy, it's a business. So you've got this group of different people needing to do these different tasks. And I would say in general, in my experience, there is more, well, I don't know. I would say there's an equal amount of operational dysfunction at most farm operations as there is in startups. So like that's saying something. And so I think, yeah, I don't know. I think that is like a major factor that needs to be thought about, because specialty crops on a per acre basis, way more profitable than row crops, way more profitable, but they also require more work. So you actually usually need a bigger team and more people. So you've got a lot of these like lone cowboy vibes farmers, and like, they don't want that kind of a staff under them. They don't want to have to like interact. They like to sell a commodity because they don't want to have to interact and negotiate and market and say, hey, restaurant, food business, whatever, like I want to sell you, even if we do something that's not, I want to sell you, organic peaches and let's barter over a price. Like that is a huge drain on resources for any farm operation. And it's not always a task people want to do. if they have access to markets. So there's an incentive there for most farm operators, and particularly competitive ones, to change what they produce. And that can, I'm going to like even include ecosystem service stuff in there. You talk about like carbon markets and stuff, but making it easier and more obvious about how and why farms should connect to different market opportunities. That's like the really hard part. And so, yeah, a government intervention could serve to do that. But in absence of that, nothing changes.
It's interesting. I wouldn't have thought about. It's been a while since I've been inside a farm from like a business standpoint, and so the idea that they're run as efficiently as a startup makes me see a lot of opportunity for efficient, like just streamlining things. If that, like hopefully not too extreme, because that's pretty terrible. If anyone's ever worked at a startup, just imagine like chaos and like 30% inefficiency. I'd say is probably like pretty normal. Like they go fast, but they like waste a lot. Yeah.
At least. Well, and then like take that and put that in a rural place, right?
Mhm.
So like you've got no oversight. Like there's no oversight, period. So you've got crazy things happening on farms that also like then you get into like the socioeconomic political fabric of things. Like it's hard. I focus a lot on labor. Almost every country, the unskilled, and I'm air quoting, which I guess you can't see on a podcast, but like, because there's no such thing as unskilled labor, one. And in particular, in agricultural labor, my experience working with folks has been that they're like unbelievably good at their jobs, actually. But most of that unskilled lower level work is done, for minimum wage. And it's done by folks who have varying levels of citizenship rights. And so that leaves a really vulnerable population who doesn't know what their rights are. And again, there are a ton of amazing farms who do a phenomenal job of taking care of their people. And also there are those that don't. And the way that the like labor system in the US works is really big professional operations. Like you think of like any of the brands you see in the grocery store for like lettuce, right? They tend to have folks, generally tend to have folks in-house working for them. But the more medium guys tend to use farm labor contractors, which technically is like a federally registered thing, but it's basically a simple LLC that typically is run by a former farm laborer who just kind of was like, okay, like I could supervise people, take a cut and make more money. And like I have personally done some like farm management in Oregon, so like I've dealt with FLCs, and there's a lot of dishonest stuff going down there. They tend not to be super professional. There's a lot of instances where workers don't get paid. And the reason this is set up this way is kind of a liability shield, right? Because you've got this like, okay, these folks said they signed their W-9, but maybe they're not actually citizens. And so like, you don't want to be vulnerable to that on the farm employer end. So this is part of the like, take that away. And it's a middleman system that I think could be leveraged through appropriate competition to improve the situation. But currently, I would say usually the opposite is happening.
I was recently, I think it was on Frontline or Dateline, was doing a series about human trafficking and how agriculture is one of the big up and coming human trafficking sectors. And like Tyson's Chicken got busted having like a whole like compound for people that they would bus up, and then as soon as like payday came around, it's like, hey, look, ICE. We found some not licensed people. It's like I feel like, I mean, the punishments for doing crap like that to people should be much higher, because clearly the incentive is to the corporation to take advantage of people when they're doing that. When you go towards like minimum wage or like trying to get like the most from people like that, it seems like what you're saying, like there's just ripe for abuse. I always wonder like how can you take like the specialty crops that we were talking about a minute ago that are very profitable, and is there a way to like have like in startups, for instance, it's very common for people to have like equity stakes or some type of like profit sharing. Like imagine how people would work if they had some form of that. If they had some type of buy-in and they knew like every time I pick something, this is a little bit more for my family, or a little bit more for my friend. Like we're all working together, etc. Like that. Instead of thinking how can I screw someone over, I think how can you empower people to get the most. I feel like one would. I always wish like there's no ethical way to study this, right? Because if you it's sort of like you like, oh yeah, sure, you go with like human traffic over there, and I'll do the right things over here. We can compare them at the end of the year, but there's no way you do that. I guess you'd have to like see how one works and then retroactively do the right thing and see like what the outcome would be. But human trafficking is also, yeah, I was reading about that. It's terrible.
Super embedded in ag. Well, and this is where like honestly, I'm like, especially like you look even from like an environmental standpoint, right? Like long supply chains are like not the problem. Like in refrigerated specific use cases, yeah, sure. But like from a climate standpoint, you should grow stuff, I think, in the regions that are optimal for that particular thing and then export it. I think that's fine. Get really good at it, get efficient. I don't think monoculture to a certain degree is inherently that problematic, actually. And I think it's going to take us a real long time to get towards industrial level production that is more diversified at scale. Again, in an economically feasible way. But like the thing that I do think is really that I value as a consumer about American produced food is we do, relatively speaking, have pretty good oversight and protections of workers. I would say there's definitely room to improve. But again, generally speaking, we do a pretty good job. Now, what's interesting about the way the labor market is and has been for years is the supply. So the worker supply side is the scarce part. If you are willing to do farm labor, or this is where like FLCs could be competitive. If you are an excellent, reputable FLC that every day that someone calls you and you say, you know, I'll send 50 guys to a blueberry harvest, like you send those guys and they show up on time and you send an invoice in from your QuickBooks account, like that would be amazing, different. No one does that. That's not handwritten, you know? And like the pounds picked invoiced lines up with the pounds sold of blueberries, which doesn't always happen. Just doing honest business, honestly. Like you are going to, and you pay your people on time every time, people are going to work for you. Like that's kind of how this environment works. So in a way, you've got a real time experiment going on of like, okay, if we do this the right way versus the wrong way. And the other really big piece of this that like we haven't talked about, I don't know if you've read about it, is like, do you know about like H2A?
No, what's H2A?
So it's kind of like the Band-Aid program for our lack of agricultural workforce. There's like H2A and H2B, it's a visa program. But it essentially says, okay, we will bring in foreign seasonal workers under the H2A program. You have to provide those workers. There's like a higher minimum wage set for that. And that ends up dragging up the like pragmatic minimum wage for everybody else. It's like adverse wage rate, but without getting into like wonky acronyms and stuff, essentially most farms now rely on H2A labor. They have to provide that labor with transportation, housing. So like they're already more expensive than local minimum wage. And then you've got these on top services, and they tend to be really great, like really valuable members of the operation, like strong workers. And they're there for, you know, they come up, they work for part of the season, they go back down. Historically, much of this program has come from Mexico. That continues to be pretty true, but in different regions, like we've got like in the mid-South, you see a lot of South Africans now coming in. So it varies a little bit. But like year over year, H2A labor and reliance has climbed, and it's really expensive for farm operators. And I would say it's a problem if you have a job that, even through different kind of economic things that are happening in terms of employment rates or unemployment rates, right? People won't do that job locally who could do literally anything else. So I mean, this is like what I focus on at Farmhead Ventures is like, how can we make it work both for the farm operators who have to run a business and make money in usually a commodity context, so like they've got a capped upside, and how can we make it so that people want to work on farms at every level? And like we have to solve that problem.
Mm-hmm.
And like the historic solve has been pretty bad. Like slavery is kind of the history of agriculture. So the problem will get solved, but it might be by turning another eye, human trafficking. So like I think there are opportunities to solve that in more ethical ways.
Yeah. No, I would think so, especially with the modern technology that I think you referenced at the beginning, where in the Midwest things are well automated. So you could have just people come up with automated machines and just beast out something great. I think with all that in conjunction would make it so that human trafficking would be less prevalent. Then again, I generally think, like you said earlier, if you want to be successful, do the opposite of evil things, and things will work out. I think like if you want people to work well, have you thought about treating them well? If you, this evil idea of like, I had a friend who was like always tried stealing, just like being evil in negotiations. I said, people see you doing that. Like I don't do business with you. Like there's a reason for this. You need to stop doing it. He's like, well, you need to get the best deals. Like there's a point where the deal is just pissing the person off, and they'll use you and get rid of you. It's like all your deals are like one-offs. They never talk to you again.
Yeah.
And then like anyone even associated with them don't talk to you anymore. If you want to do well in business, I feel like if you just selfishly do the right things, things will work out for you. It's like the evilest thing you can do is be a not evil person.
Sure. Well, hopefully you're not using that to evil ends, though. Hopefully you're like motivated, also altruistically internally. But yeah, I know, I agree. It's kind of it's astonishing that like it seems like a good long-term strategy to be a jerk. Yeah, totally.
Well, I think most people see like a Steve Jobs type person and they think, oh, I'm going to go around and yell at my team, or I'm going to try and take advantage of here or there. And I think that people like that are kind of the outlier. And even Steve Jobs wasn't terrible all the time. But I know people who think that like that's a good business plan, to be like this evil capitalist, imagine like the most evil capitalist person you can think of, like they think that's what you're supposed to do. But in terms of addressing this concern directly, getting people to want to do farm work, what are some of the strategies that you have envisioned and tested out that you've liked so far?
Yeah, I mean, I live in tech world, right? So, and there's limitations on that because honestly, I think one of the most obvious solutions to this is actually kind of like operational consulting for farms. Get farmers to be equipped with management skills. Like I know that's like a very non-tech fix, and company culture turns out to move the needle on attracting and retaining employees. So like I would say that's one. I'm doing less on that. I am focused more on the like deeper tech side of things. So like you've got, like I said, like the like soy and corn. We have poured so much resources into those crops that, which is great. Like they're incredibly efficient to produce. They're relatively easy to produce. The equipment and the insurance part, like the entire wraparound stuff that exists for them makes them relatively easy to farm. Now, farming is not easy, to be clear, but like relatively speaking, you can do it. That same investment has not gone into literally any other crops. Maybe rice a little bit, but like even there, like it's not quite as much dollars amounts. So somehow we need to drive more investment towards these other crops, but that's hard to do because now when you look at the proportion of acreage and overall value of each individual crop, and you're you're trying to make money and venture capital or really anything, you're like, Well, this market is so much bigger. I'd have so many more addressable. My addressable market's way bigger if I do corn and beans. So like, there's a lot of good reasons to focus on keep making the current big thing bigger. So the puzzle that like I'm trying to solve for is, okay, how can we align resources and shareholders such that we are supporting the like badly needed solutions for these other types of production systems, I'll even say. Because like I would actually people in like regenerative ag would get I don't want to like regenerative ag is like a loosely defined thing right now, or it's strictly defined by certain groups. But anyway, I would kind of lump regenerative, diversified, alternative systems. I'm going to lump it all over in this like specialty crop category right now, because it's all stuff that has received relatively little investment and resourcing and research and all that stuff, right? And so, but the problem is that like there's like not, there are very few solutions that would make this problem better that fit all of the stuff in that group. You actually have to break it down further. It ends up being a super fragmented market. So you have to be really, and like in startup world, I see a lot of companies that will like show up with a robot or whatever, and they'll be like, my addressable market size is, you know, the global specialty crop market. And I'm like, I don't think so. I don't think that your solution is going to work both for almonds and romaine. I just don't think so. And you know, like almonds grow on trees, and it's just like there's just so much variance. So I think that the way that we can actually, I think that a lot of the solutions that would make agricultural work, the future of work on farms, really more appealing, aka less hard and less grueling, are probably not like unicorn type companies. They're not going to be $1 billion plus potential, but they are, and they're also probably going to be regionally specific to a certain extent, or at least have to have some semblance of regional specificity. And like there are business models that you can do that with. And so we have to figure out those business models and financing models to enable that. Because like all the technical stuff, we can figure that out. Like a lot of this stuff is not rocket science, but it's a resourcing problem more than anything. And it's, I think also in America, fewer than 1% of Americans, and that number is diminishing, have any exposure to agricultural production. So like, how do you lower the barrier and like open the door and say, hey, technologists, innovators, smart young people, like we want you to work on these problems, and there's opportunities to build profitable, impactful businesses that solve for these specific problems. So like we have to get more people in ag at kind of like every component of it to solve.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's really a complex problem. I was just thinking like, where would I go to get people like that? And I feel like if you were to go to like high school lunchrooms and you said, do you want to keep eating this? Because a lot of that stuff, I think a lot of it's not made in America, and it's terrible. It's not good for you. Like when I was in high school, at least, it looked like, you know, prison food. And so maybe like making like a regulation type thing. I don't know if you've ever seen like meals it made for kids in like different regions. Like Italy's food looks amazing for what they give their students. And so if there was a requirement where that food had to come from America, and you have specialty crops, you know, that a balanced meal from it, you have an immediate demand there that needs to be supplied. If you also had a requirement that had to come from America, that's one thing I've always been kind of weird about, where we have a requirement or we'll pay someone something that benefits like a different country when it's designed like in principle for America, but because it's like something like I think one example is like ranchers, how like some people in South America can like label their beef as made in America because they move the beef to America and then process it, and it's like that's not really like made in America. That's like sourced, and you know, it's like a little a little unfair because you're getting like breaks and stuff, regulations and stuff in that way. And so I've always like, it's just as like an easy win, like go to those high schools like, hey, this sucks, you know, and we're working to change legislation so they have to have these requirements, but we need people to build to grow these things. And guess what, you can have money. Like you'll do a good job. I feel like that if I was a high school student and I was looking at that slop, and you said I can make money and I can not be eating slop, everyone working together, like that'd probably get me pretty excited.
Yeah, I mean, okay, couple things there. The one thing I want to, so do you know what the most consumed fruit is in America?
No, I wouldn't be able to guess
Bananas.
it.
Bananas.
Oh, really? Wow, that's not.
Do you think
Do
we
we
grow
grow 'em?
any bananas in America?
No, I
Couple,
don't think so.
like couple in Hawaii, and that's about it. None. So like there are a lot of things that I think we do want to, and like also like if you want produce during the winter in most places, certainly where you and I live, then you better hope it's coming from somewhere else. So yeah, I just would like push back a little on the like purely American food side. But there are a couple of interesting programs actually, and like this was one of the some of the like corrective actions that were like attempted during COVID actually have, I think, helped to move the needle on what I would call like institutional purchasers, which includes
Mhm.
schools and cafeterias, and like towards regional producers, right? And that's great because like where I live in St. Louis, there's not very much specialty crop production around here. It's corn and beans and beef. And like there's a little bit, but there's not much. And there could be more. Like we have southern Missouri has pretty good conditions. We could be growing more specialty crops here. And we have a couple of cities around there too. Like there could be market access. But financing that transition, because if you think about a lot of fruits grow on trees, and that's not a cheap thing to install, I'm gonna say. It's not it takes time to get to harvest. And then again, you need to have that workforce. They cost money. So I think that some of these like purchasing programs and forward contracting stuff can be really impactful. And you are starting to see more like food as medicine prescription box stuff being federally funded, and you're starting to see more school lunch stuff also be either state or federal through state kind of funded stuff too. It's the thing. Okay, there's an interesting project that I worked on I used to work with Ag Launch in Memphis, and they are continuing to do this work with Foundation for Food and Ag Research, FAR, on this like open market consortium, which basically the intent of which was to connect small, I call them medium growers, medium. So like small and medium growers, and with with an emphasis really on underrepresented producers and largely Black producers. We're in the Delta and Mid-South region, with institutional purchasers. And the way this is where like, so the way that the system worked, we created a blockchain-based smart contract system. And the goal was kind of to do a couple different things. So one, for the producers, the farmers, and the buyers to try to mitigate the dual risk that exists in any specialty crop transaction. So like today, if I'm growing peaches and you own a grocery store, there's a good chance that we're doing kind of a handshake agreement. Like you've got like a kind of bougie grocery store. Like I've had little transactions like this go down with like brands you would recognize, so I don't want to throw anyone under the bus. But like if you do a handshake agreement and they say, okay, yeah, I'm gonna buy your peaches that you're transitioning to organic and you're in year 2 of a 3-year transition, so they're not USDA certified, but I want to encourage that behavior, so I'm gonna offer you a slight premium. And then I say, great, I'll grow these peaches for you. And then you change your mind. Like you can just change your mind. And similarly, I might find someone who will pay me more, and then you don't have any peaches this year. And like it's this dual contractual risk is like a huge issue actually. But then the reason that this open market consortium project is built on the blockchain, even though there might be cheaper technical ways to do this, I suspect, but there also is this level of price transparency that exists in commodity markets that again makes it really easy to operate. Like you can go on a million different apps right now and figure out your regional basis points to sell your bean and coin. Like it's very easy. You can play the market. It's not easy, but it's easy to find the information and you can play the markets, right? Whereas with specialty crops, and particularly non-commodity specialty crops, so like you can sell your peaches as peaches, or you can sell them as organic, regenerative, female-owned farm produce, right? Whatever special attribute. But it's right now, there's so much opaqueness in that market. There's no way besides like hearsay to understand like, okay, if I grow peaches in St. Louis City, which would be an interesting thing to do, but like I'm just like on a specific county, right? And if I could get market information that said, hey, I could get a 30% premium to sell them as organic and another 10% for it to be female-owned farm, then like I am going to be able to say, okay, I'm going to do those things so that I can pull that premium. And that doesn't exist right now. And that data doesn't exist right now. So it's really hard to make good decisions as a producer about what you should grow and how you should market it.
Is it a part of what you're working on or intend to work on is making that data marketplace? Like I imagine like Amazon, but with data instead of products. Well, I guess it would just be Amazon. You could have products on there and like have people market, I guess. Because you have like the backward, you have the analytics side of it, so it's kind of like Amazon.
Yeah, that's an interesting way to think about it. I mean, I'm not working on this project anymore. It would be interesting to chat with the guy still working on it. But I think the idea would be that, like the user interaction component. So like who would presumably maybe be the producer, maybe it's a middleman actually, because you do need to have like fresh produce storage and distribution. So maybe that's a role that a co-op could play or something, or a food kind of pantry or a food hub. So maybe there's a middleman that ends up being kind of the customer that like peruses things and says, hey, this is what we want. And they do the forward contracting, and then resell D2C, direct to consumer or something. But the idea would be to like start to aggregate it and then figure out how to disseminate it, because like, but it gets really tricky because like if you are the sole relatively large producer of some niche specialty crop in your region, odds are very good that you're getting a great price for your stuff because you're the only show in town, and there is a premium for local, and grocery stores do want to carry it for the most part. And so you don't really want the guy next door to know that he could get in on this because that's going to dip your margins. So like farmers are competitors too. And also we didn't get into the like land ownership thing, but like that's also where it's like you can start to reverse engineer how much your neighbor's making or not and like buy him out at the right time kind of, or undercut him and go to a land, like there's a lot of competitive dynamics between farms as well that make it even harder to get this data.
Yeah, I see. Yeah, there's no real incentive. It sounds like there's actually quite a lot of disincentive for that type of system to exist. Because it only takes one unscrupulous person to like ruin. I guess like one apple ruins the batch type of thing. Just want to touch back on the labor issue for a second. As unions are more and more in the news, do you see anything like that, like a union going into the agriculture place to make sure there's like people are taken care of, being something that would help alleviate those concerns and create something, or how do you see do you think unions have a place in agriculture in the future?
Oh, this is such a politically loaded question for agriculture.
My bad.
They're essentially illegal. Like you can't have farm worker unionization. Now, there's an interesting thing happening, and like I wish I had all the details of this so I could speak more intelligently. There's an interesting happen in New York State right now where they have something got changed legally, and it has enabled for like UFW, United Farm Workers, is like kind of like the OG like Cesar Chavez, right? Like the kind of like farm worker rights group. And they've really been on the decline in terms of efficacy and impact, but now they're going up again. And it's because there's been, farms have combated directly, like they don't want to pay people more, actually, which makes sense when you look at a budget. It's a really hard problem to solve because like you can empathize with both sides of this equation, right? But no, the agricultural industry has effectively prevented that from happening. And in New York, there have been like, I think 5 new, I don't know if it's technically unions or something like Union Light, but there's some new kind of, I'll send you like a Civil Eats article that you can drop in. I think it was Civil Eats. I'll send you an article that you can drop in the comments after this for follow-up on it, because like, yeah, there could absolutely be a role for something like that. But the thing that's interesting that is happening actually, again, politically, is like, and this is a political hot potato, and this is why no one talks about agricultural labor. And I feel like it's worth talking about. So if I put my foot in my mouth, I put my foot in my mouth, but there's agriculture also has overtime exemption in most states. So you do not, normally if you have hourly workers who work more than 40 hours, then you're getting time and a half. California, which again, most of our specialty crops, most of our agricultural workforce doesn't have overtime exemption anymore. Oregon, Colorado, New York, I believe Pennsylvania. There's like 2 others, but like we're increasingly in liberal leaning states eliminating that. And it's interesting because like I am a pretty progressive person. Like I very much believe in living wages. And because ag is seasonal, the way that like that annual income works historically has been, it's super lumpy. When you're in season, you make a ton of money and then you go home. But now because of the so like in a way, progressive politics have gotten out in front of something they don't quite understand, I think. And so, one would think, okay, the consequence of this must be that we're going to now, farm workers will make more money, right? That's good. That would be the goal. But actually the consequence of it is that farms say, okay, well, you're only working 40 hours this week. And we'll figure it out with that content. Like that's actually the reality of how it's being implemented. And so that's like a huge problem because you hamstring farms and you hamstring workers. It makes it even less appealing to work in agriculture because now your net annual income potential is lower. So like, I don't know. It's a really hard problem and I don't really know how to solve it. There's some like, you could do some high level subsidy stuff, I guess, that would kind of fix it for a minute. But like, yeah, it's a complicated problem.
Yeah, that's interesting. I would have you technically they should be getting paid more, but because of it, it makes sense. The business is like, well, I'm just going to cap you at 40 and then hire more, like scale up in that way. So then they get more. There's that like in tech, there's that like the Mythical Man Month, I think is the book, where it's like the more people on a project don't solve the project faster. But I guess in labor, if you added more parallelism with more people, I guess technically you could get more done with the same amount of hours because you just like have them start on the other side of the field or something. So I guess there is like a local maximum in terms of like how many people.
There's definitely a local maximum because like right now we're at a point where it's like you're just like starving for oxygen and like manpower, and so it's like no one can be like you're take whatever you can get. So you've got some hustlers and some, and like this gets even more complicated because like a lot of, again, specialty crop stuff, payments aren't hourly, actually. They're piece rate. So they're based on, you get paid for what you pick, essentially. And so that can be good. That can lead to a lot higher payments. And then like you still have the minimum wage. So you still have to pay people the minimum wage. But like what ends up happening is like apples and cherries are grown in the same regions, right? And so when it's, am I going to get this right? When when cherry harvest, oh, I'm gonna flip this perhaps. But anyway, no one really cares, I guess, except for me, that I feel like I'm getting this right. But like if you need to do cherry harvest during the same time that you need to do apple thinning, cherry harvest is going to be paid per pound pick. And so if you're a laborer in that region, you have way higher earning potential at cherry harvest. And so while you would normally be down to do the apple thinning, just like you can't be two places at once. So now apple thinning, while it's a smaller proportion of like the overall labor use in apple production, it's actually almost a more acute problem because you don't like the people that you usually have aren't available then.
Mm-hmm.
So like, yeah, and like you kind of have to like on a regional basis balance all of that because we used to have like a super seasonal migrant seasonal workforce. And I think people still think that is what kind of like ag work is, but like that's not really how it works in the US anymore. Like that's you used to go like Florida and up and around, and like that's not how it works anymore. People tend to be pretty stationary these days, with the exception of, again, like the H2A workforce, which is just like binary migratory, I guess.
Mm-hmm. It's really interesting. I would not. That's what's really cool about having people like you on, who's more like who can go in depth on all these different fields. I grew up on a farm. I was in 4-H and all these things, but it's like once you take like one step out of it, it takes a lot of work to get back into it, in my opinion, because it's like they don't know you as well. Like I used to just walk on anyone's farm that I wanted because I knew everyone in like the neighboring like 100 miles. And now it's just like I wouldn't do that because like they don't know if I'm like some bad person or whatever. And I miss it. I miss just like walking on someone's farm and seeing what they're doing and then offer suggestions or just hearing how they do their crops or work with the horses or whatever. Which is a really nice thing to do. Like most people are very down for that.
Yeah, I was gonna say, like, honestly, you probably wouldn't have problems. Do I know the odd farmer who's got like dynamite mounted to his pump? Yeah. So like maybe careful of that one. But like, yeah, in general, like I feel like they'll invite you in for dinner probably.
Well, there's I was talking to my wife about this and I said, if you want to go look at a farm, let's just go bring a pie and say, hey, we really like the way your farm looks. Slide the pie across. Yeah. Is it okay if we walk it?
I keep like bourbon in my truck. Like
that's the tip.
Yeah, which is like another great, yeah.
I didn't know about bourbon. I'll add it to my repertoire. I thought pie would work.
Pie would work too. Pie would work too. It's just that like you leave your pie in your trunk for too long, that's not going to go well.
That's true. Bourbon is pretty much good until the rapture. But so labor is huge. It's very complex. You're in St. Louis, but you also have partnerships with people out in California. Like you're all over the place. Like you're very like embedded. Have you thought? I guess there is that fun to it. The fact that there's so many different aspects that you can get into at one point in time. So that like maybe hyper focusing on like the St. Louis region or like your hometown or something like that wouldn't be like it could be still as complex, but I'm just imagining like a part of the fun of it is you can go from like cherry pickers in Wisconsin to almond growers in California, and then like the problem sets that you're seeing, while dissimilar, also have some level of overlap. So what you learn in one region can be applied to other regions.
Yeah. Well, I mean, look, okay, every problem, right? Like the more you zoom in on it, the more complex it becomes. Like, like I feel like you can really only start a company in an area that you like don't fully understand, because like the more you know about a thing, the more you're like, oh God, this is never gonna work. But yeah, it's super fun. I mean, I love being in the space, and there's a lot of stuff that you can translate. Also, there's a lot of stuff that you can't directly translate. You can only partially translate, and like there just aren't cookie cutter models that work well. Like you can use the same template maybe as a starting point, but in general, and like even one of the companies I work with is doing some stuff in blueberries in Peru, and I literally farmed blueberries in Oregon. So like I thought, and I'm a nerd, like I thought I knew a lot about blueberry production. And in Oregon, it's like high bush blueberries, blah 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 blah. I could talk about it for a long time if you want. But in Peru, this huge blueberry producer is growing one enormous blueberries. They're like, they have this one blueberry they export to China that is legit, like I think 2.2 millimeters, so essentially an inch diameter, which is like insane to think about. Actually, like that is a big blueberry. And then also like their bushes are younger and shorter. They keep them shorter, and they're harvested far more regularly. Like normal in Oregon, blueberry harvest is like 2 or 3 times a season you do it, and like that you usually do your last go with like a mechanical shaker harvester thing. But they're treating it more like strawberries, where you're going multiple like every, I think the cadence is 7 days or something, but like a weekly harvest cadence year round, which is just like blew my mind. So all to say, I only know the little things that I know, and I don't even know what I don't know. And this gets to my point of like, this is really a fragmented market. So like this is the hard thing. Like there is a huge cost to scale technology between fields of one farm, between farms of the same crop, and then between farms of the same crop but in different regions. Like there's just so much variation there oftentimes and I'm not saying it can, I mean, I literally like live and work in the space. I believe you can make these economics work out to be quite profitable. It's also really hard. You also need to know what you're doing to do it. You need to be disciplined.
I was reading today because I was freshening up on agriculture because it's been a while. But it was either something related to you or not. But I'm remembering that there's someone who made like an Uber for farm equipment, and I think it was Africa.
Hello,
and they're
Tractor?
actually being, I think so, but they're actually it's like very, yeah. I think it's like that's pretty. I think it's profitable or something where they just like they like I think that's one thing that is kind of odd when you have like a $250,000 plus piece of machinery and everyone around you has to buy a $250,000 plus piece of machinery. That adds to like the capital cost that you have to account for when you're running a business.
Yeah, no, totally. Hello Tractor is a really cool business model. And like there's sort of versions of it in other places too. And like especially as you start, so and this is again where like you've got context specific problems that you have to solve for. And like I really don't know anything in the like, I read a bit, but like that's not the same as experience. I really don't know anything about the African agricultural market or anything but the North American market. And so, and like I worked on a farm in France for a while, so I kind of feel like I know that a bit. But so it's, yeah, you have to just be so contextually specific. But it's interesting on the like Hello Tractor front, like with this next generation of equipment, like do we end up with like swarms of smaller robots and like, or do we end up with like super specific use case stuff that like the only thing this robot can do is harvest an apple? And like if that's true, like that better be either a super cheap robot, or you're gonna have to figure out some other kind of business model around it. And like the thing that everyone talks about today is like robots as a service, which could be part of the solution, though I think kind of neglects to account for the fact that providing services, whether that's as like a farm labor contractor, like providing services to farms is not easy. And it's geographically dispersed, and there's all sorts of human elements that are very challenging. Plus not even accounting for like weather, climate challenges. So like, yeah, it will be very there. I think one thing also that's like not, people don't realize is a lot of people rent their stuff. Like there are a lot of great equipment rental companies, like people rent their equipment in many contexts. So I think that's like an undersung part of the like ag equipment market.
I was looking into digging a hole for a reason. I'll tell you off air, but if you want. But I was looking to dig a hole, and I could have like a team come out, and it costs like $5,000 to dig the hole, or I can go to Home Depot, and it costs like $400 to like rent the equipment I need, and then I get to have fun for an evening. Like people pay for that privilege to like dig a hole with farm equipment. There's like whole industries on this, so I was like, yeah, why not? I'll just dig the hole myself. So yeah, even in like just a Home Depot in a random city has those type of rental services. Like you don't have to get like all that hard to find. Like Home Depot's like I think most people listening would know like a Walmart, like a Home Depot. So it's not like insert really esoteric company doing rentals for farm equipment.
Yeah, well, and I mean, or like every ag equipment dealership, there's like a bunch of
Mm,
companies doing this anyways, and including Home Depot. And like, but it's funny too, because like there's also a business model opportunity there, right? Like
mm,
you think about like all these like small businesses, and like I play rugby, and like we were just talking about, okay, we have to get someone to line the fields for one of our game, right? Like you need the stupid little field liner thingy, and like some guy on like the men's rugby team has that, and like they as a service do that. And so that's like how they make money for their team. And like that, that's like a classic example of like this super simple side hustle that is really niche. But like, yeah, like during rugby season, every weekend, you can be darn sure, and actually every other sports season, you can be darn sure that someone needs their field line. And like
mm.
you can kind of charge what you want because no one else is investing in this random little piece of equipment. So like to translate that to ag, what I think is an interesting opportunity is, can you leverage really progressive farm labor contract companies, or in like the Midwest, like you've got like contract harvesters and stuff that again provide services. They say we'll bring our combine in and we'll do it for you. And so can you create more of those custom service companies in specialty crops that both provide a new channel for like the next generation of equipment and other technology, really, and ease the burden of finding people for farms, and like create a competitive environment, thus improving the conditions of the people doing that work. Like that, I believe, is, if we're going to shift land use in any way, meaningful way, like that has to be the solution. And like I think we'll start to see some of it happen.
It sounds interesting. So for a large segment of the people listening in are millennials. Millennials not done it really. And then you have a bunch of people who are 55. I don't know who anyone out there who's above 55. Please leave a comment. I want to know how you're doing. But so millennials, this is for them. People listening in, Gen Zers or whoever is listening in, and they're seeing an opportunity. I think it's really nice to hear an opportunity, because sometimes if you just listen to the news or just like listen to what's out there, it's like there's no opportunity. The world sucks.
Yeah.
Just give up. Like there's very doom and gloom. So I love that you're saying like there's opportunities here to make money and be ethically making money, which I think is nice. Like it's with the modern generations, I think that matters for a little bit more than like the Carnegie fellows of the past. So for people listening in like that, and a part of the hurdle is getting on the inside so you can start seeing where you could find the rugby line people. Because like rugby, there's a person who knows rugby and they saw that opportunity so they could like translate that over. What would be your advice for people like that to get the hands-on experience or to get integrated in so they can start seeing the opportunities to help out those communities? Is it like a fair thing? Is there like an association type thing? Is there like how would someone go from like listening in like, oh, this is fun, I like food and I want to help feed the world, to get into the point where they can find those opportunities that you just mentioned?
Yeah. Okay. This is a hard thing. Well, I mean, honestly, like because like you've got like an edge, honestly, because grew up on a farm. Like being in 4-H is the ideal way to have street cred in ag,
Mm-hmm.
which is a little silly, I would venture to say. Actually, like it's not good to be too insular as an industry, which I think ag can be. That said, I think, again, like there's a know that like almost every part of agriculture would love a hustler to work with them. Anyone who is going to be honest and do good work, like I would guess that if you cold outreach to, I was gonna say 10, I'm gonna say 25 to be safe, which is like, to me, I love cold outreach, so like that's like a safe number. Like if you cold outreach to a bunch of people, someone's going to be interested in hooking you up with something. If you're like honest, you have some skill set, and like you don't mind like doing some kind of work and being humble in your approach to it, and also being eager to learn about your gaps. Like there's so much opportunity. And so like I'm in tech world, so there's like startup companies don't have time to usually run effective recruiting processes. Problem is often also they don't have money, so like that's suboptimal for a job. But sometimes they do have money, and so you can do things like track funding announcements. There's group like newsletters like Ag Funder News that like cover that really well. And then again, like on the farm operation side, like a lot of folks are on. I think it's an interesting thing, right? Like I grew up in New Jersey and like New York City suburbs, essentially. And like even like I'm going there tomorrow to the city to go to a friend's wedding, and like both my sisters are in Manhattan or Brooklyn, and like and one is a Gen Z and one like me is a millennial. Or like she's right on the edge, actually. But anyway, and there's like a lot of so I have a lot of friends and family who are very much like, oh, why would you even like they think I live in like the country or something, and like St. Louis is a city. But like there aren't very many people who are willing to relocate or like live in different places, which you do practically have to, you at least have to spend a lot. Like you can't really remote farm yet. You can do some remote tech work on farms, but like you got to be willing to get your boots muddy and spend time on fields with farmers. There are also, if you want to like start with online resources though, like I try to make a point of lowering the barrier to entry for people who aren't born on farms to work in ag tech specifically. And in particular, I focus on underrepresented folks, so like women, people of color, etc. And that's a factor of like my experience of as being the only woman in the room a lot. And so I have this one resource called the Ag Tech Toolkit. Like you go to www.agtechtoolkit.com and like that's free. And it's got a bunch of resources for like deep diving into different specific crops. And like we continue to add stuff to it. And like a lot of folks, again, like cold outreach is the short version of my advice. Always cold outreach on LinkedIn and Twitter always work. Well, doesn't always work, but eventually always works.
Yeah, and I think another just like adding on to it, it's like if you look at your plate and you see something there that you want to learn more about, like just pick that. I think sometimes people feel like they have to have like how do you start noticing opportunities? Start looking at the world around you. And so if you're looking at agriculture, maybe look at something like just what you already eat, or go to farmers market and see what's being made around you. Just have like I think cultivate curiosity and ask yourself why a lot. Like Leonardo da Vinci used to have a book where he just would write down like his questions for the day. Like why does a woodpecker have like a weirdly a triangle tongue? He spent the rest of the day just trying to solve that problem. But at a certain point when you start doing stuff like that, opportunities will start coming your way because you'll be really curious. And so I think that if you're sitting there thinking like, oh, cold outreach, I'm like nervous, like then it's like, what version of it and stuff like that. I think look at what you're already eating, look at your local environment, and then just like you're saying, like people are really nice. And you, for one reason, on your LinkedIn, you literally say like, hey, you can reach out to me. Just I'd really appreciate if you told me why. Just like give me like a little bit, give me something so I can have a nice conversation. Which is really nice. Like you like really reducing that barrier entry.
It's funny though. I was going through my like LinkedIn messages, I think last weekend, and so now I have like a like over like, and I don't accept LinkedIn requests until I've talked to you, but I will send you my Calendly so that we can talk, and then I'll accept your LinkedIn request, right? Because like I just don't. It's honestly because I am bad at remembering people, so it's like a personal, almost using LinkedIn as like a really broad CRM. But yeah, so now I'm like deeply underwater in in like calendar invites. But it's frustrating because like I truly like I don't care about people's resumes and background. Like I never did a formal internship in my life. Like I worked in restaurants and lifeguarded and stuff. Like I don't care about what you've done necessarily so much as like, I have limited resources in what I do now, but like I care more about potential usually in interactions and intent. And so like, yeah, I like definitely be very specific when you cold outreach, because it just helps the other party be able to be like, oh, like you're not right for me. But even like I'll have folks reach out and I'll be like, I don't think you're right for me. I think these 3 people are right for you, and I'll pass your deck to them or whatever. Yeah, you got to be specific.
Yeah, I think I think taking the other person's point of view and then think what reasons would they say no would also helps. Like when I'm like reaching out to someone, I think like why would someone immediately be like not worth my time, not worth my time? It's like if you're being really vague, being very open ended. Sometimes it's a nice thing if you're like specific. Somehow it's specifically vague is the thing. But like if you can be specific, and make it really easy for someone to say yes, it's kind of it makes it hard for them to say no. Like I think when I get emails, for instance, like if I can tell that you put any amount of like noticeable effort into it, I will probably respond to you. But
Yeah,
if you like spam me, like I will tell, and you just go to the spam folder. Like I won't even like you won't. I don't even remember who you are.
yeah.
So I imagine that applies for everybody. So for you personally, is there anything people listening in, or just in general, any help that you need to do what you want to do? Yeah, I guess I'll start broad there, even though I just said stay away from open ended questions. But what help do you need?
Um, I so I mean, like, I'm building my own firm, right?
Mhm.
I can't like explicitly ask for some of the help that I need because that would be soliciting, so I can't do it. But I am always looking. If you are working right now on technology, or you think you might be in the future, that changes and improves the future of work in agriculture, with a focus on food production, but like I also am opportunistic and I do work in row crops sometimes. Um, very I invest in early stage, like pre-seed stage companies. Um, we do both equity investments, so like standard stuff, and redeemable equity, which is like a form of revenue-based financing,
Hmm.
that I think can be more appropriate in certain contexts in agriculture, given the, again, like the regional service kind of component thing, and also the reality that most exits in agriculture come via M&A, so they're not so big. Um, so yeah, like if you're working on those issues, I want to chat. If I don't know if you have like a lot of farmer listeners, but like to me, the most important network I have actually is more on the production side.
Mhm.
So like if you think I'm wrong, let me know why. I'd love to like learn from producers always. But yeah, I don't know. That's kind of my ask, I guess, today.
Yeah, and if anyone listening has an idea to solve any of these big labor etc. type problems, I imagine you're like the first person to be like, I want to read that comment. So if
Totally.
you comment below, I will forward it on, or I'm sure like it's not hard to get a hold of you. Honestly,
Yeah, literally, like I
that's
do,
out
I
there.
literally check my LinkedIn messages.
Mhm.
Give me like a little context about why and what you want. And you don't pay for the like LinkedIn message feature. I mean, do if you wish, but like I don't care. It doesn't have to be that long.
Mhm.
But yeah.
Yeah, and then personal question: why rugby? You were born in like I don't know anyone. You're the first person I've met who plays rugby. What drew you to that?
I played lacrosse in classic Northeastern things.
Mm-hmm.
I played lacrosse in college. And I like am extremely competitive, like problematically competitive, perhaps. And I like to the point like I can't be in like a casual beer league kind of kickball thing. Like I'm gonna be like angry at people for like messing up. And so yeah, I had a friend here who played rugby in St. Louis who played rugby in college, and she said they were competitive, and I showed up and they are. In fact, we have a competitive team and we like practice hard and we play to win. And I love that.
Hmm. Is it one of those sports that's like football in terms of like having to worry about concussions, or do you guys? I all I know is rugby
I
exists.
can't watch football anymore. No, now that I
Okay.
know how to like, no, because technically in rugby, like the rules are that like you are responsible if you're doing the tackling to safely bring that person to the ground. So like you go
Okay.
down with them. Like you can't clothesline people and stuff like you can in football, and like you wear a mouth guard. That's it. So like I think because of that, like also honestly, like I have like some men's rugby teams are stupid and do stupid like clothesliney stuff. But like women's rugby generally, like also like look, we're like I'm like 29, like we're kind of old, you know? Like we're not trying to delude ourselves that we are going to be professionals anytime soon. Like, like it's a little more like we would like to be able to walk tomorrow, ideally. Though I have like this time last year, what are we in September? Like a month ago last year, I like fully broke my ankle, which was a bummer. So I'm very appreciative of walking still. Yeah, I don't know. It's like, yeah, there's like a concussion risk, but I haven't had any issues, knock on wood, and yeah, I don't know. It's like it's not that high of an injury rate relative to other contact sports.
Is it like so I'm familiar with disc golf and how it's kind of raising to something where you can watch on online
Yeah.
for like what you do, like disc golf type thing. Is it something like that? Like is there like a league where people could like tune in and like cheer you on?
We are not quite so legit that we have like streaming
Hmm.
stuff, but like I don't know, it's cool. Like my team is called the St. Louis Sabres, and like what that it's actually one of the like first women's specific rugby teams, period, like independent teams. And like there was like a little exhibit at the St. Louis History Museum for a second, and yeah, like it's just like it's what's interesting about rugby too is like the people who play are just chiller. Like I don't know. Also, this is maybe again like I feel like lacrosse reputationally is a very elitist group, perhaps. So like I'm comparing maybe extreme opposite ends of the spectrum, but there's something about rugby that's so collegial and even like it's a social sport. So like and we're like a D2 rugby team. So like we're a relatively social league. Like every now and then Lindenwood University is near here and they have like a very good college rugby team. Like they're all young and fit and recruited and they really destroy us when we
Mm.
play them. But like you play another team and you're like you're literally like trying to hit people as hard as you can for the match, but then afterwards like you hang out together and it's very
Mm.
social and like you're like you hit someone and then you help them up. Like it's a cool vibe as a sport. Like it's just I like it a lot. It's nice.
Yeah, it sounds nice. When I played football and I would try to help people up that I just knocked down, they looked at me like I was spitting in their face.
Yeah, no,
But
that's
the
not
idea,
like
like, yeah,
rugby's not like that.
yeah,
It's like a nice vibe mostly. Every
mhm,
now, again, competition every now and then sometimes you have to get angry at the other person for some reason. But again, like you usually people get right over it.
yeah. And then, so you have mentioned that you like to mentor and help people in particular that are female or people of color.
Mhm.
Being the fact that you in a room of 10 people, you might be like the one in 10 in terms of like
Yeah.
the female population. Do you have to fight to be heard or anything like that in this field? Like in terms of like if you say, "Hey guys, I think we should go left," are they like, "Oh, a woman saying it," and they go right, just like to be obnoxious or anything? Or is there basically is there a level of strategy that you have to implement to make sure that your voice is heard so that you can continue to just be a great leader that you are?
Um, Probably honestly, yeah. I mean, like this is always like a weird question to answer, right? Because it's like
Mm,
I'm just doing what I'm doing and like
yeah.
and I'm making it work. And yeah, definitely like you get a lot of the like I say something, then someone else has an idea that is my idea. And then we do it. And so like I could be upset about that. And on certain occasions I actually am. But on another level, like, okay, well, if we're doing it, that's great. Um and like I am not precious about credit. So like that sort of thing doesn't really particularly bug me, I don't think. Um but like yeah, I mean, there are definitely contexts where like fundraising, it's much harder to fundraise as a woman, period. And it's much harder and then like add on any additional things to that, like
Mhm.
it just gets worse. Um, so yeah, I mean, it is definitely a real and like also there are still industry groups in agriculture that are like men only. Like that's the
Mm.
only people. It's like, okay, well, I can't get into those rooms. And so I don't sweat it too much, right? Because like generally like I just try to be excellent. And usually people who are also trying to be excellent, and those are the ones who move the needle forward, want that. So that usually kind of helps. But like it's hard. And like sometimes you have to vent about it and like I don't know. Like it could be better. Could be better than it is.
Mhm. Yeah, I think Bill Burr is a comedian, and he was asked a similar question. Like a woman asked him, like, how could women do better in his field or whatever, and he basically said, just become undeniable versus like do anything else. Like just be so great at what you do that you make everyone bomb around you. Like when you do like up on stage,
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
people come after you. And I've liked that for an answer for like I've liked that as an answer for any time if I'm ignored or whatever. It's like was I undeniable in how I spoke? At the same time, if you say something and like 2 minutes later someone says the same thing, you, like personally, if we were in a group and someone did that, I'd be like, I'd like attribute a credit because that just seems like a socially rude thing to do. But sometimes it happens on accident. But I guess if it's a systemic issue, like it's good that you can let
Yeah.
the water roll off of you. But like, yeah, I would
Yeah,
find it
no,
like
and
kind of
look, like
irritating
you
for
should
you.
call it out. Like, I
Yeah.
like to think that I'm like not really a quiet person. Like, I
Mhm.
will say what I think.
Yeah.
And I like to think that like when that happens to other people, like I call stuff out generally. Like I
The
thought
dog.
that would happen.
Yeah.
Hey, Echo, chill. Uh, like I try to leverage my privilege where I have it to make things fairer. But it's crazy, right? Like the thing is, like, okay, just be excellent, just be undeniable. It's such a double standard
Mm.
because, like, what gets so frustrating is when you get stuck organizationally or decision wise behind a mediocre guy whose
Yeah.
dad is rich or something,
Mm.
like, so, like, yeah, that's the only game I can play because I want to win. And maybe we should look at that.
Yeah. The one of my favorite instances of a woman standing up for herself in this way. So we were in I will like not name names, so I just think it's a really funny anecdote. We were in a group and like we were all suggesting ideas to solve a problem, and so she literally just said, "Hey, I think we should go left." And like 10 seconds later, a person said, "I think we should go left," and I think no one else. Like the interval between those two things were so close that people just said, "Oh, that's a great idea," and they attributed it to the second person.
Yeah.
And I was really like, "Guys, that was actually but the woman was like, "Oh, I love it when a guy gets credit for my work." And I'm just like, "That's all great." It was like I just liked it was just like the way she's. I don't know if I say it as well as she did, but like the way she did it was just fantastic. I loved it. Like everyone else was like,
Yeah.
"Oh
Yeah.
wow, we did just do that." It was
Yeah.
just, I love it when
Yeah.
people stand up for themselves. I think it's I like it when people do that. I guess so. But for your work, is there one place in particular? I know you have a Twitter, but maybe it is Twitter, and I just spoiled it. But is there one place to stay up to date with everything you got going on?
I'm trying to be better about my social medias. I hate social media. But yeah, I guess Twitter, LinkedIn. Yeah, and Connie Bowen on Twitter, Connie Bowen on LinkedIn. And I have a newsletter called Agriculture is for People, just a Substack. I will push something out actually probably tomorrow. It's real wonky, like it's very ag labor oriented. But yeah, I guess those are like the main areas. And like we have our website has frustratingly little on it, farmhandventures.com. We'll have more presence once we get outside of what fundraising kind of stuff.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think if you ever were to do like a ConnieCon, I'd go to that. I think it'd be fun. With all these different areas that you're in, I bet you could get like the interest there. But I'll definitely have the Substack in the show notes. That being said, I want to be respectful of your time. So, Connie, I want to thank you for coming on today, keep people excited, educating us on the many different issues plaguing the agriculture sectors, but at the same time highlighting that there's a lot of opportunity here. So, thank you so much for being here today.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It's always fun. I appreciate it.